Hello, Agatha maniacs. See what I did there? I'm back with more of John Paul Miller's affidavit that he filed in Mica Francis's probate case, but probably wishes he hadn't. Let's start with Statement 25 that is dated February 10th of 2024. John Paul says that Mica had gone to South Strand Mental Health on February 7th. On the 10th, Mica's brother Nate had gone to John Paul and Mica's house to get some of Mica's belongings. Pee-wee claims Nate wanted a gun, but refused to take Mica's medicine to her. I'm not sure why she'd need medicine if she was in a mental facility, but oh well. John Paul also says that he texted Nate after he left and explained that Mica wasn't taking her lithium properly and that Nate should trust him. Trust him. Oh, that John Paul fella sure can be a joker. The text that John Paul sent reads, quote, "Hey, the medicine Mica had at Sierra's and the medicine Mica was taking was not the medicine she was supposed to be taking for the bipolar stuff. She was prescribed and was supposed to be taking 900 milligrams of lithium. And if you were a godly influence in her life, when she calls you from a mental hospital asking you to get marital property, you should say, 'Mica, you can trust your husband with your keys, phone, etc. That's why he's your husband.'" I wonder why John Paul didn't mention a gun in that text. Weird. It's almost like he just makes up stuff as he goes. Wasn't John Paul the one who admitted in a sermon that he was on 900 milligrams of lithium? In Statement 26, John Paul says that while Mica was in the hospital, her records show that she was never abused and wanted to go home to him and have a baby. I think Mica was just saying whatever she knew she had to get out of the hospital. I think she'd figured out that John Paul had people working for him in the hospital, and if she did what she thought John Paul wanted, she'd be able to leave. And it worked. John Paul attached Mica's medical records to the affidavit, and they are also from the My Health One app, like the medical records he showed us in Statement 1. But unlike that first set, these records actually have Mica's name on them. They show that she was admitted on February 7th and was discharged on February 12th, which was not the information I had before. I thought she was only held for 72 hours, but I think that her 72 hours ran into the weekend, and I don't think they count weekend days as part of the 72 hours. I also think that's dumb. The first set of medical records, that have no patient name, state that the onset of psychosis was February 9th, which definitely does not match up with Mica's medical records. The part that really chaps my hiney about her records is this part. It is unclear if patient has been taking medication, as she reports she has, but other reports state that family told her to stop. Patient constantly questioning her rights and asking to leave. Well, I think we all know who reported that her family told her to stop her meds. But where does this mental health facility get off believing John Paul over Mica? Something is off with this facility, and guess who's going to look into them? It's me. It also states on her medical records that she has no history of tobacco cessation. However, in the first set of medical records with no patient name, the patient is prescribed nicotine patches. Well, those two things don't seem to go together, do they? But hang on, maybe John Paul has an explanation. In Statement 27, John Paul texted Mica's sister Destiny to tell her that before Mica went into the hospital, quote, "I saw her getting several emails about smoking, and she's never smoked a single day in her life. Well, her doctor evidently prescribed her nicotine patches," end quote. Well, now I'm even more convinced that those first medical records are actually John Paul's and not Mica's. His text to Destiny, attempting to cover up that he was trying to pass off his own medical records as Mica's, is so weak it needs a walker. You know what else the medical records showed? That she wasn't prescribed lithium. In Statement 28, John Paul states that Mica showed up to the church in a manic state. Trisha Ross is the one who called 911 about that, and if you haven't listened to that call, you should. I think the dispatcher wanted to reach through the phone and throttle Trisha, because Trisha was too busy yelling at Mica and Michael and not listening to the dispatcher. And if Trisha thought Mica actually was in a manic state, why was she being so horribly mean and nasty to her? I'm sure it can't be that our little Trisha Rita is mean and nasty by default. Statement 29 is John Paul trying to make something out of the fact that he texted Michael about a doctor's appointment of Mica's, and Michael told him he'd appreciate it if he'd stop texting him. John Paul then says that this was the appointment that would have saved her life, as they would have properly medicated her. This appointment was with Faith Green for February 21st. Faith Green was the affiant for the involuntary commitment paperwork. Does John Paul have some strange disorder where he literally can't hear the words that are coming out of his mouth? Because he contradicts himself so much that the world's largest flowchart couldn't keep up with it. Mica was just discharged from the hospital where she was prescribed medications, and John Paul has been yelling about her not taking her meds. Can he explain why this doctor's visit was going to be the magic one where she was going to take the medication she more than likely didn't even need? In Statement 30, John Paul says he texted Mica's brother Nate and told him that the police stopped Mica from trying to get a gun and that she needs her lithium, even though she wasn't prescribed that at the hospital, and that Nate should stop attacking John Paul. The text reads, quote, "The police stopped her from trying to get guns and ammo this morning at the house. She has stolen money from the church and put it in her personal account." End quote. And the attacking part was just something about Nate posting things on Facebook. So Mr. I don't do social media admits that he and Mica shared a Facebook page, and he obviously paid enough attention to it to know that Nate was posting things. In Statement 31, John Paul admits he started harassing Mica's friends by texting them, trying to get them to contact Mica and tell her to go back home to him. In Statement 32, John Paul states that Mica tried getting a gun in front of a police officer, but then he names two police officers, Wheeler and Bowering. He stated that the officer, I don't know which one, went with him to Waccamaw Mental Health so they could inform Mica's doctor. And does John Paul offer any kind of proof of this? No way! Who needs something silly like actual proof? He did say that when he got to the hospital, Mica's family had taken her there to sign her out of the care of the hospital, and I think that was an extremely wise decision on their part. In Statement 33, John Paul says if someone would have just taken her to a professional, they would have been able to tell in 3 minutes that she was hallucinating and having delusions. Oh, that magical 3 minutes that John Paul likes to talk about. In Statement 34, John Paul says he went to Waccamaw Center for Mental Health on February 21st and filled out papers to have Mica committed again. It didn't work. On March 5th, the judge read 2 reports from designated examiners who found that Mica wasn't a danger to herself or anyone else. So it seems like Mica was seen by professionals, and they didn't find her to be a threat. In the paperwork John Paul signed to have her committed, he stated that Mica had drained their personal bank account as well as the church's bank account. According to the police report, Tricia Ross called the police department and claimed that Mica had stolen money from the church on February 14th, but she didn't call the police about it until March 13th, which oddly was 2 days after Mica and DJ were seen on the beach. How weird. Mica was cleared of all the allegations that she'd illegally taken any church funds. This is the time when John Paul started allegedly putting razor blades in her tires. And I say allegedly, even though Betty Stewart already told us that John Paul definitely did it. I guess old Betty needs to learn how to shut her big trap, huh? I'll be back soon with more affidavit analysis. Thanks for watching.